we're up to something like this. We wanted to know this really gets red. We wanted to know something which is right? The last we called Shir was about if the Sambatian proves that Shabbos is a thing in reality.
Hey, did you see the rosh?
The rosh about
wegen the größte Schade.
Tali Mutter.
No.
Then what?
Der Rosh wegen sie so besser geben eine darf essen Shabbos, muss besser geben eine Weile Fleisch, eine Weile oder Schächten.
No, what's that? The guy too. Right.
Er sucht als so Ende Schächten, weil Shabbos gab Kirchnefisch ist Kichal. It's Kichal, so wie Yontiv.
Okay, and what do we learn from this? Also, you think that from...
So kind of he looks a shtickle at what's the difference?
If you want this... we could make a difference, we could talk...
Shabbos it's kind of like...
We could talk about Hitchor,
You can't say Ali... Yeah, but I think it's even in whatever. I don't know.
So let me do something in the Weltaran, because this is not serious. But in the Weltaran, if you want to be, we keep on jumping back and forth on what they're saying. But if we talk the same question about all mitzvos or everything and about time, I skilly started with time, and I'm going to try to focus on time, the kids that are relevant only to time today. Or to zmaniyos to moadim, because but if you want, we did a few shirim, we did go in this like very broad. Okay, we could talk about if all mitzvos in the world, to what extent they're real. It's like you say, it's lav dafka that all of them are the same. There's nothing is machriyachas. I keep on saying is l'shetusa. The Rambam tends to think that things are fake, but that's not entirely true. There's a lot of there's a lot of confusions about this. I like you saying lemushel, but it depends on how you understand machul zasiris, for example. But it's very mixed. The Tosfos famously says that tzadikim einig zbruch maftekun rythm was only b'midid achila, right? L'man af kemina. Okay, Tosfos tam macht achilik, but the svura that says in different achronim that is the din of taamei halev, and there's a whole din, and it's not It's not simple to say it like this. There's a whole din in the Späte de Achronim about if you eat ba'oines or if you eat beheter and verschiedene fanim, kind of the red wing bittel, if it's still metam to mesalev, right? Now, suppose the more rational way is to say if it's mutter, it's mutter, then shaykh is tim to malev. But that's actually not the rational way. That's the less rational way, because then you're saying that tim to malev is nothing. It's just words. It doesn't have any referent in reality, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's a confusion. If you're like Rambamist, if you're trying to make things make sense, and at some level you should want things to be real. Because then you're trying to say it has some reference. In the other sense, you want to know the truth. So you don't want to make things that are real that are not real. This is where a lot of confusions stem from, this kind of... That's why the Mekabulim, in a certain sense, if they want everything to be real in general, that's because they're extremely rational. They're scientists. They don't like this story. I said a whole shitty last week. I talked about this more, right? The Yiddish... okay, I'm getting confused. I'm getting mispazer, but... A lot of people are very uncomfortable with things being arbitrary, with things being what the Rambam calls mefersumas, right? The things being just heskaimi. Yeah? After Shabbos, it has to be in hand Shabbos. It has to be real, and that's actually a good. There's a reason. The science, nature actually tends to work like this. Any scientist will tell you, why did things fall gravity? Hunted I take evolve. That's not a pshat, right? The dimension. That's not science. That's society. That's the whole difference between science and social truths, right? And that's where we get the whole shal. The shal is if legal things or halacha are social truths or are real truths. And I think that for sure, someone like the Rambam would tell you that there's for sure some mitzvahs that are true. And the ganze chilik from mitzvahs that we have to take seriously, and this is of course very radical, but of course there's some mitzvahs that we have to take seriously and some mitzvahs that we don't. Right? The Mushal, the Rambam invented something called ikrim, right? Which is another way of saying these are the things that you should take seriously, right? Other things are tofel. If there's a ikr, do a tofel. That's what is broiges. And what he's saying is that these are the ikrim, these are the things that are related to reality, because the God existing and God existing in a certain way, more or less that's the only ikr that are real. All the other ikrim are fake, but And those are the things that are reality. If you take away this, then you're a goy. Then you're behind stuff like a goy. You're less than a goy, really. A goy also has to have the ikrim. So, if you don't keep Shabbos, or if you even if you eat machulas asiras, these are asira kedisha. These are things that only chal are yid. Anything that's only chal na yid can't be real. Can't be real in the Rambam's. Because real is another way of saying universal. If it's dangerous to eat chazer. Now, of course, I don't think this is necessarily so. Right? It's possible that it's actually bad to eat chazer, and that's why goyim are taka bad. Begashmis, the Gemara thinks like that, right? Chuvil gifai, because they eat machulas asiras. In other words, it's taka not healthy for you to eat machulas asiras. Not healthy either badly or mamish, or it's not healthy, maybe more mifshet Abyssal shkechelik, when it's taka bad for the goy. In other words, if a goy want to be a good goy, you should stop eating chazer. And if you want to be a good goy, you should have Shabbos. That's what should come out. And if you say that's taka, not instant, that's you can make a chilik. If Haid is schlecht, Hagoy is nicht schlecht, ken and all these things. And anyways, the drive to make things real is going to try to say, and therefore we could obviously make chalikim, and the chilik is always going to be like this. Anything that's real has to be taken seriously, and hatayrim don't work for that. That's the big thing, right? A'ayrev, there's also darkers in this, but even kluli, that's how I understand. A'ayrev tafshil was helps not to fake problems. If it is made a problem, as a pesha was a pesha, we can make a made up teretz. Why do we need the whole thing? Because we can snap them in. It's tamates on unkan ayrev. But if the whole thing is social, then if it's tamadin, then we can make a din kegen the din. But if it's a real problem, if it's misik, then it doesn't help the din.
I think that when
that's the whole din of hamitzvos cant me'asira.
I don't think it means that it's the
Oh, you could say that. Maybe it means.
And the
if it's just lamdas,
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If it's just lamdas, then it's just lamdas, then it's not negay.
They never talk about
If it just I think that I'm not sure. I think that a lot of these lamdas are based in such kind of thoughts. The nicht mamish lamdas agdura days, but it could be. But what does that mean that an isur is there?
That was nesa.
Okay, in my world, it has to mean something. Stam zu sagen, lamdas meint ich gar nicht. If this is, you mean to say there's something bad, there's something wrong with eating. No, but the Avid Megman. No. But in other words, I don't know what Isser means. It's wrong, it's bad, it's evil, it's wrong morally, physically, spiritually.
I don't know,
no, of course, no, it's not true. I don't think it works. That's the thing. No, okay. Ich mach's gerne. I feel that that Mudafas is wrong. Okay. Let's see ganz wichtig. What's the other man? Okay.
Tanya, he talks about the after the nefesh, the schwache nefesh is a bit bakim kudes when it tit meluch in Shabbos and then in es chumets be pesach. Also tun gehabt nor
the Tanya talks about kudes.
As a full an nefesh, a full schwache nefesh, a full the schwachste nefesh, du sagst a full jede nefesh kama whatever später gebrochen whatever so the schwachste nefesh von nefesh da see or something it bekommt auch it kudes when it is poigen benafshoy when it machal Shabbos and when in bekommt kudes when es chummes peis.
Okay.
Wegen the art, wegen dishes Shabbos is
yeah, but what's the
Shabbos and Pesach, these two things. So what happened to Chazer and everything? Because Chazer can man sagen, es ist Chazer. Aber Krishna Zmanim is kind of vivat. It's not. If Zam Nefesh is ugescheit, is passt nicht zu essen auf ihn. Let's say so what ja gewesen ist, und sagen, aber wenn man bonisch, like whatever ja behind, nicht wie ich. Das gar kedisches nicht muss ja.
No.
Wenn Scheich beim zu machal Shabbos an. The issue wouldn't apply.
Okay, so what are you learning from this? That what?
The thing is that so you can't say that you can't say stam that you don't do meluch on this day. I mean to say that when we talk about Azman, we're not talking about we can't like it's a shaykh asr in nothing unless that it's a shaykh in the condition. It's more not such a thing that we could say that it's like kind of that mystic thing. You can't say Adi Rivia lie on a day. That's to be
Why
kind
not?
of what? I don't know. It's what it says there. Well, why not?
Because of your diak, why is hopping on these digmor? So that's a diak, it's not a die.
It's a very strong idea. Well, why? We have to call to the killer because then.
No,
it's
bin ich masken, weil das ist nicht masken, weil das ist Reihe.
For sure.
Klar nicht
Was a
masken.
Kiddush Shabbos, a Kiddush and Kiddush Shabbos. He's Stam, he picked out these two.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
No, ich bin nicht
He
masken.
wouldn't apply. He wouldn't have this problem. He wouldn't bring a raya from isn't the violent from.
Ich bin nicht masken zu der Diak. Masken zu der Diak bechlal. Kobi dann Kid ist damals, ich bin nicht masken zu der Diak. Ich halte nicht von dieser Diak.
Look inside. Okay, look at the
He's not trying to say that. You would have to go to what he's trying to get at, but no, ich bin nicht masken zu der Diak. Ich bin nicht masken zu der Diak, and I'm also not sure it's true. Because even Lalucha not true, that's what we're getting at. If you're going in the midbar and you happen to have been Michal Shabbos every Shabbos, or if you're Tinnik Shenishma, but assuming that there's a level of oinus that you don't bring a chatos, and was nach einmal. How does oinus help? Oinus doesn't help for real things, you know.
Why?
If you go by oinus on a bridge that's bri'iyah and it falls down, you're dead. Doesn't help oinus.
So what? Because
That's so what? Real things, oinus is nicht kanteretz. Oinus is only at the even oinus gomer. Even oinus from nar lanalis asadover is only because this is all a social thing. If there's a wurai, a mamzer, I will keep on talking mamzer. A mamzer you become oinus also, right? Mamzer is the one halacha that I know for sure is a reality halacha. Of course, mekema einzan doesn't mean that the mamzer has a wrong neshama. But the din mamzer.
What's the problem?
So they're saying that kuris is not a real thing. Kuris is God giving out kuris whenever to whoever He wants.
Maybe.
But no, then that's another level of not real, but it's still not real. In other words, you can't prove that he has a kedusha on neshama. He's trying to prove that the AD that on neshama fila shvachi. That's not actually true. There's a level of shvachi that doesn't have get kuris, and it's actually a level of shvachi.
Even the gresti, doesn't get kuris if he's got oinus, he forgets or whatever.
And a chanuka. So there's a level of shvach that the yid is begeder on this. The mitzvah the gavre killer. You could even become a goy. This whole torah is this whole essentialist thing is okay. Good. You understand? That gets to the bigger problem. Then I don't like this dig. Ich halte nicht das like the dig. Ich kann sagen, but ich weiß nicht. Ich kann nicht sagen die. The Tanya wants to say something. You can say it openly.
No, he's trying to get a point, but why is he only using this? I mean, he's not.
I'm not sure. I think we could talk about lemushal. I'll tell you another. A better example would be chametz pesach. But I think that's a good big raya and the loik of this shit. Because chametz pesach is for sure isur on the chametz.
Yeah.
And im kol zeh, on the day after it's not chametz. Therefore, all these torahs that say the chametz is klippus is shtissim. The Zohar itself already asked this kasha, and he more or less was choizer from this shit because of that. It's not a problem. The Zohar, the whole Zohar about Michael Asfa says basically going back on the theory that chametz is a trach and yatzara. Everyone knows the Zohar, but he's really asking this question very explicitly. He says, and if you look at the most Leon's Ksuf also, he's even more clear about this. The Zohar beferish says that oibs is yatzara is mit dem Morgen. Elamai says nicht yatzara. It's maybe a b'chinas shoyrish. We can machen nach verschiedene fancy teurelig, but the word is he says no. It's more like a medicine. So that's a different image, a different category. It's not bad because if it would be bad, we'll talk about isur a whole year. Of course, you could say a different teretz. You could say, and a whole year we're doing something bad, and only once a year we're highlight. The advanced other people say this kind of teretz. But this is a real problem. The isur chometz is a real problem for anyone that wants to say, again, you can make a chilik. Chometz is nicht schlecht, and chazer is ja schlecht. Vurai, chazer tu m'shagan tzur. Okay, you could say that. Just saying, it's not so simple. Same thing with, what did I want to say, chometz pesach and? Oh, nedurim. Nedurim are another big raya that all the serum are fake. Okay. Well, a person could make isur cheftze. Right? Where does it come from? You could be mekadesh something, you could be isur something, both ways. Yeah. And his dibur is what? In other words, it's not being megala metzias. Science doesn't make chalas, right? Science can only discover things, right? Can't be Michael isur. It becomes literally usur, right? Even if it's pesach and he's asad the chometz on the matzah, es nicht matzah, right? It's halal dvar mitzvah. In other words, it goes in a deeper level of reality than mitzvahs in a certain sense, right? But it's still based on what you said. It's not based on discovering some attribute of the chayfetz or the thing. Okay, Akupunim. We have to go back to this gets us also to tzeitzvus Shabbos and all these things, right? Same thing. If you could move Kabul Shabbos b'dibber, then Shabbos is fake. And of course, but this isn't, I'll tell you what I think about this, and the kids are good. This is not entirely true. Because this is the achila l'maaseh, if you want to know what the achila l'maaseh is. There's, to some extent, things are based in reality, and something, or at least based externally. I don't want to say the word reality. It's based prior to you, prior to your own mind, and to some extent not. He found a nice stigma to this. Someone, Rosen, trying to remember his name. There was a shir, someone brought me a shir on Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, that mitches sich with this problem. Lefishat Rambam, this Kiddush HaChodesh is based on a cheshbon. Of course, this is another big makor for this whole problem. The Rambam says that Sadu Ibir is really basically astronomy. And nobody knew astronomy in those days, so it was a Sod. And now that we know it, it's still very complicated, so it's a Sod, in the sense that you have to learn a lot of years. If you want to know about Kiddush HaChodesh, it's a Sod, because when to make the Chodesh is based on certain basic lulim. The Rambam says literally that you could learn it in 3 days. Lushna Rambam. So Meile wird schwer a very big shorish derikash on the whole Masechta Rishuna, which is, what is the point of all of this? Of Eides HaChodesh, Kiddush HaChodesh. We have to bring Eidem. Of course, you could be a historian and say that days that they did Eidem, they didn't realize that there's a simple cheshbon. And once they did, it more or less stopped. It continued for a few generations, but it stopped at some point. But the Rambam doesn't seem, maybe the Rambam thinks that, but the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam says that the mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh. The Kiddush HaChodesh has these two parts, the Rambam is contradictory, it's Rambam Pele. Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, wie sind es makabel da Eidem, and you makrish da Eidem, and the rosh bezna same Kiddush, and ganz the halacha is the halacha. And then the next part is astronomy, and the Rambam says, then I'm going to tell you really how it works. And what is this? Copy paste from Yevunim. Baruch Hashem, now you don't have to read the Yevunim, you could read me, but Tachlis, copy paste, and it's just Chachma, and Chachma is Emes, and Shoin, and that's really the Sada Ibe. So this is a big steer, and it's really a more broader steer now that I quote it like this. But the Lomdim are very confused. What's the Indian of Kiddush HaChodesh and the Rambam's Shitta? So this Yid said, Azaz Pshat. And he tried to make it very subjective, but I think his image was a very good image, and I liked it. His name is, it's on YouTube, the Shir. His name is Rosenthal or something like that. And he said, Shapsi Rosenthal, I think. And he said that it's a mushal ma'adev hadoime to the circadian rhythm that the person has. It's a very nice mushal. A person has something called the circadian rhythm. A circadian rhythm is that your body, it was discovered very recently in the 1970s, that a body has, and they, not only people, maybe even animals and plants have something like this, that your body has a cycle, like when there's a side that when like, you get tired at a certain point during the day. And what causes you to feel tired? So there's a few different things that cause you chemically in your body to feel tired, but one of them is a circadian rhythm, and there's basically a clock in your cells. Each cell has its own, even some kind of killy clock. It ticks, tick, 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 and at some point and now then you start feeling tired, and hopefully you go to sleep. So now this circadian rhythm has a very interesting tchina that it doesn't work on 24 hours. It runs on 24 hours v'shirayim. Similar to the levuna that doesn't add up the hour. That's what I'm getting to. And it works on about 25 hours. So theoretically, if a person would go in a cave somewhere, they did this experiment, some Michigan professor, the gang in a cave, and didn't take along any clocks, so they didn't know what time it was, and they just, we're going to sleep when we're tired and wake up to figure out this is the emes, right? This is the chmamish, this is minute cuts, right? I'm trying to get at, so very avoid, right? Why are we sleeping when it's 9 o'clock? So, the cuts, because the guy sleeps jede Nacht 10 Azage, you're not really tired. You'll see, and it's true, physically, it's actually true. You'll see that it's not exactly like that. So, we're just following some social, it's fake, it's all fake, it's not even real, you're just going to sleep because your mother told you that it's a bedtime. So the best way to be a Kotzke is to go some midbar, right? And there's no bedtime, there's no gunish. Let's find out the truth, clearly the truth, right? This is a good simon why truth is not a good thing to pursue in this sense. Why? Because so this guy went in Pennsylvania, he went and found a deep cave. He kept the minute sunlight, because the sun is a big, we'll see in a minute. So he gang in a cave and took along some tape recorders, like an Austin steam of the tzad, but basically, took along some notebooks, somehow to write down, when they're going to sleep. Somehow they had some cheshbon, I don't know exactly. And Master Shoy was someone saying that the sleep, besides for getting messed up in different ways, but the sleep rhythm, more or less, runs on a 25-hour cycle. In other words, b'derech hateva, and lefi the emes, or if someone will listen to his body, like this. If you listen to your body only, if you listen to your body, then every night you're going to go to sleep 1 hour later than the night before. And actually, if you'll try, you see, I see it also. Now, what's it there? It's how come this doesn't happen naturally to people? Even in the jungle, it doesn't happen. That it says, the scientists, that the sun has another signal. Says the body takes on a few signals. One is the internal signal, this clock that ticks and shit. But then there's another signal. The other signal is called the sun. And the sun, they may be light, not left from the sun, but the sun's light. Every morning you go outside, and it resets the clock. It moves it back a few minutes. So that's why if you don't get enough sun, that's why a lot of this guy that wrote a book about sleepwalker, he claims that if you don't go out in the morning in the sun, then your sleep starts getting messed up. That's his eitz. He says if you have a hard time going to sleep on time, go make a walk every morning, mech over the fences, get some sun, and that tells your body it's the morning, so that's a bisschen zurückkriegen this side, okay? Schau, so ad kan hamitzvos shall gain schlufen, mehr weinige. Maybe there's a third thing that makes you tired, but gain shitzeran. Kapitze. So what is this mushal? It's a very good mushal for how things works. What is he saying? In other words, the truth is both. When darf man gar nicht schlafen? If you're going to go in this 25-hour cycle, it's not a good way to live either. Nicht killy dates. Just better will be like that. That's what he did. And since the society, it's not exactly. Your body is relying on the sun. And even the plants, all of them, you could verdrayak up, right? You could take chickens and make them have babies every 30 seconds with the lights and stuff. It's nicht gemacht to do that. At least human beings, it's hard to do that. But, so mitzad echad, there's these two things. So there's the truth, there's the internal clock, what we call, and there's an external clock, and they both need each other, right? And it's not that now, that's one point. So you'll ask me, when is real Shabbos? So I could make Shabbos early Shabbos, so that's because there's a reason. So there's a social reason, let's say, for them to make Shabbos early or to make Irrationalism and azay vate.
The guy for chanuka also, with this.
With the. Okay, the second important thing that the Skid learned from this is that there's a limit to how much you could schlep. In other words, you can't bring a sun 24 hours and it's looking, okay, we're going to be up 24 hours. Same thing, this reset, which is a social reset, it's making it more logical, right? 25 hours is Meshiga, the Tug is 24 show. A mention's Tug and the Zin's Tug don't entirely add up, so we have to. But we can't also make a new thing. We can't be like the French Revolution that said, we're going to have a 10-hour day. It was like Michigan has 24, some other number. They ain't sure. Not they did it in months, right? They were not even Michigan enough to try to do it with days, right? In the French Revolution, one of their iterations of rationalizing the world
10 months?
was to make weeks based on the decimal system. Because they said it was 7 days, it was 7 days. And the month of 30 was the days. We're going to make everything tens. That looked like the metric system, right? That's really the same idea. Did it with measurements. Instead of having everything random, 12 is a dozen, and there's side, it's 10, everything's going to be, so 10 days is going to be a week, 100 days is going to be a month, episode on that side, and 1,000 days is going to be a year, and trying to get episode. That didn't work out for some reason.
So the moon is still up there.
So that's reason, but what I'm saying is that you can't do that to an extreme. Why not? So you could change things around, but to a limit. It's flexible. The mechanic and the circadian rhythm. For an hour up or down, you could move it every day. You could take melatonin if you want to move it a little bit, but you can't move it to the middle of the night. So the same thing, if you tell me, that's his mushal about Kiddush HaChodesh, right? We can make other, we can make Shvat into Adar, but we can make Nissen into Adar, okay, that's even Aluch, but we can make Ir into Adar, that's for sure not. Right? The Chizki hold, we can make Nissen into Adar, but we can make Ir. You can't just switch things around arbitrarily. So this is how most things in the world actually work. There's some sort of killing what we call the reality, the base reality, and that reality is flexible to some extent. And it's not good to go only with that base reality. Why? Because it's not perfect. The Irrationalism is a very good example for something like this, right? We have the seasons, we have the levuna, and these are both true things in a certain sense, but they don't add up. And with the teretz, so you could try to be a French Revolution, or you could try to be those cat. What's his name? Rachel Eliya's favorite cat. Rachel Eliya's favorite cat. Some Issim, Sefer evil people that they said that the year doesn't make sense. Also, Shabbos and Yom Tov clash. A lot of different things that don't make sense in this way. So they made a year that's perfect. 7 times 7 is a month. And each year is made of 7 months. A year is more or less 7 months of 49 days, 7 spheres. And even half of that, after 150 days, is going to be Pesach. After 150 days, Sikkos. and works with the sun. Ignore the levuna, basically. That's the and shine, and everything works out beautifully. The math works out, but the menschlichkeit word doesn't work out. So, Abyssal math and Abyssal menschlichkeit are usually the way that things actually work. Where did I want to get from this? Same thing, Toys of Shabbos. Yeah, Toys of Shabbos shows you that Shabbos is flexible. It says, do Shabbos, the Zibet Tog, and you could make it a little bit of Friday, a little bit of Sunday. But you can't make it Tuesday. So then you, in other words, you can't ask this question. It's not all or anything.
Like that.
Like?
You know, they say, behind start from them, yeah, whatever. But
no.
But what's happens? But no, then noch do the gedurim.
Okay, that's another shtickle. That's another shtickle part of the problem.
But it's also kind of like the idea is that I'm buying top of them. But
that's another part of the problem. That's another part of the problem. I'm just giving a way out of this sort of false dichotomy that we're basing our on self on, right? Kili, oibus is echt and you can't be changed, and honest and all these things. If it's not echt, the Torah says there's an echtkeit, it's based on something, but there's also other echtkeits, and Kili. Also social echtkeit, or also mathematical echtkeit. There's all kind of reasons. And so things turn out... Because you're talking about a different question. You're talking about a question... Because you're talking... I agree in this sense. In this sense, I agree. But you're talking about a slightly different thing. In other words, maybe it's the same. Maybe it's analogous. What you're talking about is slightly different things, which is the Teretz Rabbi Yirmiya's kasha. Rabbi Yirmiyah had gefragt the kasha. The drabanan know the difference between 40 days exactly and less than 40 days exactly and so on. What did he ask? A question. Wie schlecht lefnayre and so weiter. Hat gesagt, and die weiß the chilik von 40 Stunden am mikvah and 41 so. Elamai. So what's it? If you think about it, you can think about it in the same way. There's some truth. A mikvah has to be rosh. It's based on something. Rosh ramba has to fit a person more or less, right? Now, does that mean exactly 40 Stunden? No, the Chum said there's a social need, or we could call it a legal need, but it's social need, tachlis, to have an exact. Why is there such a need? But let's say there's such a need. You can't, they assume. Also, again, even that, that's what I'm saying, once you realize that it's like this, it actually makes sense. There's a social need that you can tell a person, make a mikveh. How big? As big as you. Come here. Wie ist groß Land der mikveh? That's for me. Okay, you know what? 40 Stunden. Mehr Pusel. Weinige Pusel. Mehr. Sure. But does that mean that therefore we can make a mikveh of 3 su? If Chacham would have wanted, they could have made it 70 su? No. They have a certain, and also most of the, even after that, this is also important, even after that there's still flexibility. This people don't realize. Most poskim nowadays don't realize either. But after this still remains some flexibility. And the mikveh, even in Hilchos Mikvos there is, in different cases you'll see, you don't have to always, because these rules have social reasons, and because it's based on some kind of push and pull, so man can stippen noch Abyssal. If you'll ask me, Toys Shabbos is, yeah, but in some sense we could say it's not real. We could ask someone else to do Toys achila. We could find there still remains a lot of flexibility, but it's not nicht gemein, aber keine Wartel on Shabbos. We can't say therefore make Shabbos Tuesday. Therefore everything will be fixed. That's a very basic way out of this mishigas. I think how most things at least work. I'm not sure about all of them, but a lot of things that could work with this kind of. And it's very nice, to see that our Chachamim, they were actually very makbid on leaving things ambiguous in this way. This is a good example of the lich that I was telling you. And we see the Chum are very, even the tzaddikim from Sfira Simon and the Gemara Menachos are having this, right? Well, it's this thing that Shvius is sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday. Would make life much easier, you know. If a bris milah would be always Sunday, would be even easier for people in America.
Why would Shvius, what's the problem? She isn't fakir.
No, because it's not only because it says Machas Shabbos. No, 7 Sundays after Pesach, which is always Shabbos. You have to realize that they really want to make Pesach always Shabbos also. That's what I'm saying. The Sefer Yevlim really does this. I don't know if those tzaddikim.
Yeah, don't make Pesach Shabbos.
Yeah, of course.
The 150 is going to come out at Sunday.
How's it 15?
Yeah.
How's it 15 days?
Because 7 Shabbos. 750 Shabbos, whatever. 25 Shabbos. No, I'm saying if you connect these two things, I just see from that Gemara. No, that Gemara might be a different shit as tzaddikim. I pick the same shit, but I'm saying what you do see in that Gemara is that tzaddikim having a need for more artistic, you know, things that, you know, it's artistic persons and it's food darf man sagen from the grass that's the cleansed of the shelf. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Like, So that's true. There's such a side. And what's the reason why the people are wrong? Because you're right. The size of the sforim is something, but there's also the content of the sforim, right? And there's also other things. So the side that we have in the world is usually a pshura between all these different kind of sturim. And that's the more menschliche way of thinking. The Chaznish about Deutschland says this more or less, by the way. The Chaznish and the Kintersa.
The tablecloth was once off the table, and he fixed. So he said to fix it. It's a stuck brass good almond.
No.
This need to close thing table. That's in the bria. That's a totally big thing. Stuck brass almond. This
we could make a different.
For a side in the world.
Yeah, but we can make. Yeah, but it's nicht makes him at least. But we could make more theologies about this and be toilet in more things. But we see this in other places also, like I was saying. But even clearly, even legabe. What else did I want? I had a lot of the Gmos and the Kiddush HaChodesh was another example. In other words, the Loika Rambam, right? The Loika Rambam that in the end wants it to be science. Or maybe you could say that's the teretz of the stiras of Rambam Keli. But you see the Rambam is pushing very much in the direction of science, direction of Purim Chatichim, of clarity. And the Derech Chazal is not the Derech Rambam. It's not the Derech philosophy that's looking for clarity, because they think that it's not rational. Because what happens when you rationalize things too much is that you ignore the things that don't belong to your side, and you just say that this is rational. That's basically Yisod Irrationalism is doing that.
Very not simple? Why is like the first chayt with the ideas and the Rambam? We're talking about like strictly logical. Like
no, because it's a fetish that the ideas make something real.
One of those ideas. When there is
the real teretz in the Rambam shit is not this. I'm just saying. Why do you even need to look outside? You don't even need to look at the levuna. That person said that theoretically you don't even need to look at the levuna, right?
Well, that's the
and we know how Vuraya, if Adam come and tell us.
Item for a murder, yeah, but not item for levuna.
No, Vuraya, if Adam come, if Adam come and tell us the levuna wrongly, we don't accept him. Right? That's what the Gemara says. If Adam come, and the Rambam says Pasuk is like this. If Adam come differently, we don't. What's the right? In other words, the cheshbon is stronger than the item. So what's the point of the item? So that person said something like this. I don't know if it's. I'm saying I use it more like as a mush because I think you had a nice analogy with the rhythm and the Irrationalism is really. It's more. I think Irrationalism is a better example than Kiddush HaChodesh for this, but because it's mamish, he shows you these two sturim, and it's not going to be exact. If you're tzedeki, you figure out a way to be exact. How? By ignoring a different cycle, by ignoring the levuna, basically, right? Or let's say they figure out a way to make levuna stem with this chavaisnish, but basically by ignoring and levuna is a certain reality. Why do we care about levuna? People go outside. Nowadays we don't matter. And he said that person that nowadays only what says in the books matter. But in those days, when sharos gang levuna is it? Wait, what do you mean? It's chodesh trade. Levuna is meant in the levuna. So at certain, in other words, we have to convince you that you saw the levuna also. Yes. Yeah, of course there's things that work with levuna. I'm not disagreeing. But I'm just saying that's what the person said, that even if there's a cheshbon, that doesn't mean that we could not see the levuna at all. If it matters, agama, the truth of when the levuna is going to come is up reality, up cheshbon, but you also have to see the levuna. It makes a difference. And even if you didn't see, we're going to convince you that you did see. That's what it says in the Gemara. We're going to convince the item that they saw it, right? Yeah. Of course. They didn't. Both ways. The Gemara is misfakayach over there. Yeah, and the Gemara says we have to say lies. But the point is, of course, we convinced that there was levuna. We can't say there's no levuna. We're just going with logic. Alt tashir. The logic is geneg of to wissen when the levuna is afkemen, so we have space of a day or two to play around with. And maybe you'll play around with even different reasons. But you don't have space, infinite space. Okay. And I was saying that you see this fuzziness. The chomim, the Yiddish chomim, nicht the philosophy, nicht the mekabulim, for the most part, but the chomim, chachmei Yisrael, the chumsayfa yidden, I'm very happy with the ambiguity, with the fuzziness, because that's how most of life actually works. And what's my examples for this? The example of chtzos that I was showing you was a very good example, in some way. What was the example other examples for this Yisod? Das heißt, agamas the halacha zukt, man darf ja jede Sache aber nach klar, because the Rebbe is because of kommen chachi. Im kaze, they don't actually do that for everything. Even and they understand, they always remember that klal is somewhat fake. I don't like the word fake. Somewhat socially defined and not really defined, and it makes difference to the way they understand things. So tausend Gemüse für das ich try zu gedenken, was ist basically the whole concept, okay, whatever, everything is like this. Okay. So now what did I want to do lamaase? I'll have to finish this thing. One nafkamina, the ikke nafkamina that comes out from understanding things like this is the inyan of torah shebal peh. I've read in different contexts. But I bumped and I realized that things got to this. Torah shebal peh, there's not a yesod called torah shebal peh. Right? And torah shebal peh, people think that torah shebal peh is just another book. So technically there could be a book, torah, that's written down. It could be a book that's not written down. And we're matted written down to write it down, so now there's no torah shebal peh anymore. But Lamasse, and I found Rav Chizdu Kreskas in his beginning of his cipher says this also, so there's already people long time saying this, that's not actually true. In other words, for various reasons, it's not correct to write down Torah shebal peh. And I feel if I'm going to write Torah shebal peh, the Torah shebal peh still existed. In other words, they wrote it down. He claims that they wrote it down in a certain way to allow space for Torah shebal peh. Yeah, said in Arashem and the Akdama. And these Mevakar the Rambam, it seems to be to me that the Rambam does try to be mevatel Torah shebal peh in this sense, because the way he writes his book, that's why he writes it, not in the way of the Gemara. And therefore you don't need Torah shebal peh, but Lamasi you do need. Okay, now what's Torah shebal peh? What is the yesod of Torah shebal peh? The yesod of Torah shebal peh is kipshita. It's in the action, or in the human part, the participation in things. In other words, goes back to what we're saying, there is no one true Torah that exists in Olam HaTorah HaMefshetes, in the Platonic ideal of Torah, which we are just copying. Like the Rambam describes Moshe Rabbeinu as being a matik, right? Kemat Nevi'as Moshe is being like just copy-pasting from the, right? That's Torah Shebeksav, but Torah Shebal Peh is not that. Torah Shebal Peh is always going to need a human person to learn it. Of course, Lapi, Klulim, and Lapi, different ways of what else Lapi received things. But it needs a person to be machriya, always. In other words, there's no way out of this. It's an essential part of Torah Shebal Peh, La Halacha, and Lagud, and everything, to have a human being in the loop. Not like by Kiddush HaChodesh, not because he needs to be someone that knows the correct cheshbon or the correct halacha. Because the halacha actually gets decided by the human being. This is also the same yesod of what the Mekabulim call, and that God needs people, right? It goes back to Imek Adova, this yesod. Because the Golem Ganze Machloikis, in a certain sense, the only Machloikis that exists between the Rambam and the Kabulim, if you read Yitzchok, as you'll see, is if God needs people, right? According to the Rambam, it doesn't make sense to say that God needs people. Maybe there's the darkness, but God definitely doesn't need to, because the whole idea of God does not need anything. So God doesn't need people. The Ramban and others, the Rambam doesn't say it openly, but other people say that this is the one thing that the Rambam got 100% wrong, because God needs people. Of course, in a certain sense. In the sense was beside it, but in a certain sense. Yeah, but what does it mean about Yitzchok? I can explain you what it means in this sense. In this sense, it means very simple. That there is no one true wisdom or true knowledge that it just exists objectively for itself. Knowledge and cycle and always needs people to that the knowledge should exist through them and in them, and their ways in which they will tell it will actually change the knowledge. It's a very hard thing to say, of course, but it depends on how you understand the whole universe. That's what Avodah means, of course. In other words, the categorizations, right? Of course, the reality you can't change, but the way in which reality is organized to you, this is also what Kant says, if you think about it, right? The way, and the same with, in other words, the halacha only happens after the roof says...
You can say Kant without this, no? I mean...
And the way in which the halacha, or the way in which knowledge will be organized, needs humans to add their part. Of course, it's like I said before, it's not, you can't make it yesh ma'an. Humans can only do yesh ma'yesh. That's the whole idea of being human, that you can't do yesh ma'an. It's a difference between God and you. But it's not completed without you. That's the chanish, minis chacham. That's why they have a minis chacham and not only minis chachma, right? There's two different things. And the same thing is with Torah. In other words, like the Medrash, like the Gemara says, if there would be no Yid, there would be no Torah either. I've said Torah is 2,000 years before the world. No, there's such a kid, there's such a part. But to know if it be the human thing, like there's a circuit, right? If there's a circuit, yes. If there's a circuit of like an electrical circuit that's created by the knowledge, it only connects to each other if you put a person in between. The exact person means this person that's about bechira, that could make mistakes. That's what being a person means. Right? Being a person is not just a place where to put knowledge. That's a computer disk, right? A person is a kind of being that's had bechira, which means he has mistakes, which means he has in the Rambam's language choimer and all these things. That is needed for the circuit to work. Circuit of knowledge, circuit of God and everything. And the same thing with Torah. So theoretically, there's no way it's not possible to write down the Torah. Because as much as you write, you still need a person, which is not, a mensch is a mensch. And therefore we need...
A person, you need a yadin.
No, not a yadin. Yadin would be just a person as a noise of the chachma. Right, that's a computer. A left say not a computer.
Meaning how the Rambam understands God, it's the way they do your mother.
Yeah.
So then, that's why you don't need any people. Meaning the Kabbalah don't hold that that's God.
The Rambam understands knowledge. It goes back to epistemology, to basic way of understanding knowledge, not so much to theology. I think all machlokas Rambam really are not totally in theology; they're totally in philosophy. And if you understand knowledge as being totally in people in some sense, without people would the knowledge exist? That's the question of the tree and the forest, right? In a certain sense, the tree wouldn't fall. That's the whole shit. The tree is not falling if there's no people. Why not? Of course, the tree will fall. But this concept tree is a human concept, in some sense. Because in nature, there's no trees. There's just atoms. And we can be told in 1,000 different ways, and it's going to confuse us. So no, at Kant. That's why halucha l'masa. That's a big difference. Halucha l'masa. That's why halucha l'masa. You both need humans in the loop, and there's no way to have Torah without the humans. And those humans have right within whatever the limits are. Of course, nicht whatever they want, but based on some sort of tradition to define the halacha. The Rambam says openly that that's lo soisiv lo sigv doesn't mean chacham in zamaratzim, and the Kizr says both things openly in different ways. This is a very important thing because the whole shittas chanuka is based on the idea that Torah shebal could be written down theoretically, not really, but that's what seems to come down in some way. In other words, it's not possible to write a full halacha sefer. That's another way of saying this. You could write the whole Shmir Shabbos Galchus and not know any halacha Shabbos because you need Irua. And Irua means this human cycle, that human that's going to be machriya. When is going to be a question? And most things are questions. All things are questions. Okay, you could say you're already going through the achrua that some other person was machriya, but it's still the person that does it, and not the actual truth, So that's the big nafkaminah, and that's the big nafkaminah from this whole understanding. And it's also, I have to say, it's impossible to write it down. Taka impossible. Not just explaining the lamdash reason why it's impossible, it's also factually impossible. Again, because of the way knowledge at least is transferred in human beings. Because you could see people, if you don't have any context, any outside the book context, people read books, it's amazing, yeah? I'll give you a Yiddish example, yeah? Das Seifer Yitzira, yeah? What is Seifer Yitzira about? What it says, just so you know, Seifer Yitzira is one of the clearest books to exist in the Yiddish. Ich kann Schalke Vetaria, ich kann Gemurre, was man weiß, was the Gemurre will bechnal on the end. We know exactly what he's saying. It's not even a question of what he's saying. In other words, the content is clear. The structure of the book, what he says, it's not written in riddles. Maybe, no, not at all. You could read. I'm in it. In other words, you're not missing any Torah Shebal, but you're missing the whole Torah Shebal. Right? In other words, you could be a philosopher like Rav They're going to say, this is talking about, or you can be on the Kibbutz and say it's talking about 10 spheres, because that's beferish 10 spheres, but do you even know if 10 spheres means those 10 spheres? Maybe it means a different 10 spheres. We don't know. Nobody knows. Why does nobody know? Because it's a cipher of Torah Shebal with zero Torah Shebal and totally useless. In other words, it's useful for everyone to be toilet their shit, isn't it? But you can't learn anything from it, because you can't learn anything from Torah Shebal without Torah Shebal. And you could see, I see it happening also. If there's some guy in Ergetz, and he's going to tell you things that say there, and it says, steht, es gerecht steht, but you're just reading it with the wrong glasses. And nicht weil ich weiß, ja, alles. And man can, sometimes he has a nice chat, but it's time, hype sich nicht tun. Yeah, he talks about this. It's a very complex thing. But because it doesn't also, I don't also think that only the people that went to a certain yeshiva understand things. And I also think that there might be a way, like the Snil ben Knazach Zidam Papila, it's possible maybe to reconstruct some Torah Shebal Peh. Not saying that it's mamish, but it's always going to be tuli in a person. It's not possible to write down everything. It's impossible. And I think that probably most of halacha suffers from this problem and everything else, of us not knowing what the people who wrote down meant. Like, for example, this is why I'm saying this now, because last week, I said also about Thursday, I was saying something from here and said, what do you mean? But the chanuka doesn't seem to say this. But I'm saying, what you're saying doesn't say in the chanuka. It's what you're imagining the chanuka needs to say. But it's not I could give you an account of the chanuka. In other words, I could give you a torah shebal peh, in which the chanuka has a totally different meaning, and it's not possible to be machriv between my pshat and your pshat. But I do know that my pshat is better because my pshat assumes that there is a torah shebal peh, and your pshat is saying shtayt. Okay, so and that's the nafkamina of that nikidem. Yeah, what time is it? I really wanted to do this. So what I wanted to do, since we wanted to know about Kedushas Hazmanim and what are these things about, so we really have to learn what the people called the Rishonim said about, basically about taamei mitzvos mitzvos, right? Because that's really what we're after. Yeah, stimmt. That's a good place to look. Smaskem. Chayre. You want to know what's Shabbos? If you go to a yeshiva, it says, "What's pesach?" So the Rambam and everyone else, they all wrote books that say what all mitzvos are, and including what pesach is. So maybe if we'll look there, we'll find out. Right? So of course we'll try to look. And I'm going to try to focus on a nikida that's close to our nikida. I'll try to explain why. But can I do the ganze Agdome correctly right now? But basically, I'll try to go to the Rambam and then try to. Maybe later we'll be able to get to the Kizri and why the Kizri has such a different way of thinking about the whole world. So I'll have to be 3 more shiurim at least. I did the Kizri in very certain context already, but I want to do the Rambam. So the Rambam, let's try to explain where the Rambam generally says in like 5 minutes. Try to say what the Rambam generally thinks taamei mitzvos are, and therefore also what taamei mitzvos moadim are, and so I'll say about chanuka, and if we have time, we could try to explore the nikida of time, how time works in this itself. So the Rambam in Chaylik Gimel, very famously, gives clearly the Torah has 2 reasons, right? Two taamei, okay? And taamei to the Rambam means another way of saying tachlis. In other words, what the Torah, what the mitzvahs are for. And what mitzvahs are for to the Rambam is very important if you understand Aristotelian metaphysics, basically. When we say reasons or causes of things, we don't mean, when I say what something is for, I don't mean something external to the thing. I mean something inside the thing. Aristotle has everything inside the thing. Right? In other words, to ask, that's why the question of tachlis of the world is very complicated, so people don't get this. According to Aristotle, when you want to describe, to understand anything correctly, right? To understand that cup, right? You have to answer 4 questions. He calls them 4 causes. Or cause just means for whys. Or for whats. Doesn't exactly translate, right? In other words, if you ask a modern scientist, usually they'll only give you 1 cause. A cup is atoms organized in a certain way. That's already 2 things, by the way. But, okay. Right? But generally they ignore the tzira for whatever reason. That gets to our question with the emergence, right? What's a cup? Yeah. Cup is atoms. That's not true. Cup is atoms organized in a certain way. Where's that organized in a certain way come from? According to materialists, it doesn't really exist. But that's very stupid. It doesn't, not what normal people think. Right. Just gonna get this right. But of course, Aristotle said we need to, because of that, we have to add 2 more things. Right? So we already have 2 things. What it's made out of. In other words, it's made out of paper, and paper itself is made out of whatever. That's chayma, and it's organized a certain way, right? Now, organized a certain way really means we could have to answer 2 things about that. Who made it organized in a certain way? How did it get organized in a certain way? Right? Some person, generally if there's a cup, some cup maker, put it into a certain way, right? And that's something that's somewhat external to the cup, but it's really what gave it the tzira. So it's part of the description of the. In other words, if you tell me a cup is not just atoms, it's atoms organized in a certain way. So that organization happened by a person, so it's very close to the person. It's not a svate masa. I have to say a whole sheet about chassidus and what happens with this. Okay, kitze nachashi. But it's very important. You understand why the poil in what's called poil in Jewish or Italians, an efficient cause in English, is a very close thing to the real thing, because he's not talking about. It doesn't have the image like who made the cup and then he went away. Of course, he went away because since we're talking about the accidental causes, they could go away. But it's the form of the cup is based, has its existence because of someone pushing the matter into that form. So it's something that's always, in a certain sense, in the form. If it would be a real cause, it would always be literally, because even in a cup, it's very close. And the same thing another thing we have to explain when we talk about a cup, which of course is again some sort of plat in the tzira and some sort of plat in this pile, is what a cup is for. In other words, if a cup would just be some random pieces of matter organized in a round way with the clay kibble and so on. That's not actually. Even when I just told you, I already said something more, right? I said something like clay kibble. That's halacha gedura, by the way, right? Which means that a cup has what modern philosophers call it a function, usually, right? It's for something. To answer the question, what is it for? A cup is for. We could say a lot of things, of course. We could say more far things. It's for throwing a cup of water, throwing water at you, right? That's one for, but that's not really for that. It could be
Aristotle,
a friendship.
Is he clear about this? What a cup is for? Like, is there a thing by it?
Of course.
Purpose.
Of course, that's called purpose. That's tachlis. So part of the description of a cup or animal is easier to say, right? What's a heart? Parts of animals or animals. Hearts are for pumping blood. Yeah. It's not really true. If you ask a modern scientist, he'll tell you that that's how we talk, but it's not really true. For Aristotle, it's really true. A heart, the meaning of the heart, the essence of a heart, is that it's for pumping blood. Whatever I don't know if that's what he thought. He thought different things, but whatever it's for, right? The same thing. A cup is for filling it up. That is what a cup is. If you'll tell me everything about the cup without telling me that, you didn't tell me about a cup. You told me about something else, right? Maybe in reality we can't see it. This is all in the mind, all these chalikim. But again, another whole sheet to explain how it's only in the mind. But a cup means a thing that's for something, right? If theoretically, if it could be everything, we can in our mind imagine. We can't really think of something that doesn't exist in reality. But imagine a cup that has all the other things, right? Someone made it out of paper into a certain shape, but it's not for anything. Then that wouldn't be a cup, right? It just wouldn't be a cup. It would be something else, but not a cup, right? It's not possible because anything that's going to have form is going to have a tachlis. That's what form. Maybe it's another way of saying form, even in a certain sense, but right. And therefore, now, of course, some people do things that have no form, right? This is how Rambam introduces taamei mitzvos, right? If you're a meshigana, like gedura von a meshigana is eine von seiner Sachen, was kein tachlis, right? Or a game, we can talk about playing games maybe in a certain sense, but of course that's not true, because the tachlis of a game is to enjoy yourself, so it's trying to tachlis. But if you're a meshigana, a total meshigana, like a very deep kind of meshigana, is someone that does things stam. When you ask him what it's for, not why, you understand why I'm saying what it's for instead of why. It's really the same question as why. Why are you doing it? In a certain sense, we could ask. You could say that same. This is soft mas machshavah, but then we could say that it's the same question as why you're doing it. But we're not talking about why there's another person and why did he do it? Because that's already a whole other thing. I'm asking that's what I'm saying. It's in the thing. In the thing, what is it for? If you're a mashigna, you just pushing together pieces and then they're nothing. Then you didn't do a mass. Then that doesn't exist. The thing basically doesn't exist. There's nothing. There's no. I'm just playing around and just moving paper from here to there. Of course, that also has some. And theoretically, you could imagine something that totally mixed, has nothing, basically has no existence, right? So therefore, since mitzvos are a thing, mitzvos exist, and since mitzvos not only exist, but they were created, or mitzvah, it's a way of saying created. That I'm called Master Hashem, created by God, which is obviously not stupid. We could say a lot of things about, might be able to say very few things about God, but one thing that he's not is Meshiga, right?
What?
Eine Sache, was Gott ist nicht, ist Meshiga. Total Meshiga ist nicht. Okay, we can't say weinig Sachen we could say about God. No, this is the whole oimik of things. Because I own it. Eine Sache ist nicht das total Meshige. This is the Rambam, the leuke tanya, that I the total Meshige. Eine Sache ist nicht das total Meshige. The Rambam, the Tanya kommt the Rambam will tell him that he has a God that's totally crazy. Nicht stam crazy. Mehr Meshige wie alle Meshige in the world. And that's nuts. That's not God. I don't know what that is, but God it's not. Okay, we don't even have to talk about God. We can talk about Maaseh Hashem. The world is definitely not Meshig. Every time we checked anything in the world, we found it have a function or a reason. Of course, according to Aristotle, according to some modern scientists, but that's the way, even according to modern scientists, right? That's why we have science. That's why we have philosophy to explain how things work. We don't suddenly. It never happened that there was, like I talked before, right? It never happened that it was Tuesday and Wednesday. It never happened that the sun came up at night. The world is nicht Meshig. It's not run on roots, and it's run with a side, with a chachma. You could say that mitzvos are yet from the cloud because they show that God is Meshigah. Fine, the Rambam is very against that shit. Kapunim, ich verstehe was that. Get a kapunim. So since one thing that God is not as crazy, mitzvahs definitely not only that. If mitzvahs wouldn't, that's why I'm saying that it's not only about God not being crazy, because then you're already talking about God and the mitzvahs are two things, and the mitzvahs are a thing. They have some existence to them. If they would have no tachlis, they would not exist, more or less. That would not be a thing. It would be like a piece of paper. Nicht kein Kop, nicht kein mitzvah. So mitzvahs are a thing. In other words, asking taamei mitzvahs is really part of the description of the mitzvah. It's not something that, why did God? It's not a question about God, really. That's what the Rambam doesn't really think we could really ask questions about God, and he didn't make that mistake. But everything that God made exists. And to exist means to have a tachlis. just like it has a means, just like imagine, just like you have to understand, just like if a mitzvah wouldn't be anything, right? Let's say someone would come and say 700 mitzvahs. Yeah, I steht no taryag. Yeah, that's the ones you could see. But there's another 100 and how many? 87 that you can't see. They're mitzvahs. Mizaitin, vizalachastin. Steht hamitzvah. Then you would go and lock the guy into a mishgum, right? Because it's just saying nothing. And the same exact thing, if you tell a mitzvah that does nothing, has no function, then it's nothing. It's not a thing. I don't know what it is, but it's not a thing. Right? So different mitzvahs have a thing. They're doing something. Now, of course, what are these functions of mitzvahs? In which category of reality we put in mitzvahs in? Who are mitzvahs? So it's very simple. The Maaseh, the Rambam's world. Since mitzvahs are for people, so mitzvahs are things that people should do, right? And then the mitzvahs are for people. In other words, for shleimus of people. So basically, mitzvahs belong in the category of ethics, right? There's a philosophical category. And we have to basically explain all mitzvahs in terms of certain concepts of ethics. That's the only kind of things that could be. There's no way out of this. Right? We might be able to take this apart, but I'm good. So therefore, the Rambam says, now ethics has a lot of parts. Just how like mitzvahs, that makes sense. There's not only one thing for a person to do, there's a lot of things. But of course, we could put them into very basic categories. And the basic categories for the Rambam are two categories, which you call tikna gif and tikna nefesh, right? So in other words, you could be mitzvahs about which are for making your body better, and we'll qualify this in a second, or they could be about making your soul better, right? Making your personhood better, you as a person. Yeah, and there was mind that's a little tiny bit more bepirit. Means body has three meanings, I think, or 2.5. One is kipshitoi, b'riyas agif medarke avodas Hashem, and there might be mitzvahs which are literally about this. Maybe busa b'chulav, and maybe some of them chulas asiris are just because it's not healthy. Okay, maybe treifus, things like that. Okay, number 2 is, I don't know which order to put 2 and 3 ways, but number 2 would be tikna midas, which for the Rambam exists in your body very clearly, at least in your nefesh v'hamis, whatever you want to call it, right? They're not part of your neshama. So, but taking up with this to have good midas, which means derech hamitzvah, you could look in the chazayis to know exactly more or less, but include what that means. And the third thing is tikkun ha-chevra, tikkun ha-political tikkun. Okay, and those are 3 things that are good, and both include, they're all interesting only for the body. And in a certain sense, when we say tikkun ha-midas, the Rambam says clearly in the end that at least tikkun ha-midas is useful only politically. It's not really useful for the person itself, but I think that's not only halfway true. Tikkun ha-midas l'choyre has also te'ilas and tikkun ha-nefesh, we'll get to in a second. But clearly, the Rambam says very clearly that tikkun ha-midas, what's the point of tikkun ha-midas? That we should have a society that works. That's the point of tikkun ha-midas. Okay. Now the word tikkun ha-midas is for other people, not for you. The Rambam says this openly in the end. Okay, now there's tikkun ha-nefesh. Tikkun ha-nefesh is really what we're here for. This is all called shleimus Rishoner, the first perfection, and the Rishoner in the sense of, because the person starts from that, not Rishoner in Ma'ale, but it's important because una gift, nothing starts. So the second thing is tikkun ha-nefesh, which means one thing. The Rambam says beferish one thing, and then he says another thing. That's why I'm dividing into 2 things. One thing is to have the correct opinions. Well, not opinions. Opinions is a very bad word. To have the correct knowledge, right? Correct knowledge. Dais is also a bad word, confusing word, because the Rambam uses dais for midas. So, sometimes. So, it means having the correct, not opinions and not beliefs, because those are, well, we can divide another one, right? Having the correct beliefs or opinions, which is one level, but really it means having the correct knowledge, which is not only having a belief, but knowing, whatever the difference between those things, understanding or knowing, difference between Kabula and Amin and Das. And, so that's what tikkun nefesh is. The Lamasa, the Rambam, of course, this is probably a prat in this, but the Lamasa, the Rambam in the end, so this basically means Amina, and the Rambam's teaching you all the Ikra Amina and so on, and how to know them. And secondly, in this prat, we have something that it says in the end of the Rambam, which is the practice of that. In other words, it's not enough to know, you have to also think. That's what it says in the end of Nevochim. That's where we get this Bodis and the Vaikis and all of that. Now, the Vaikis is not only to know, theoretically to know, remember, we could say, but to actively know, right? Then you're really dovik in God. That says in the Moed. That's when then you have hashkucha, and any other time you don't have hashkucha, and so on. Okay, but so this is matura. These are 4 or 5 or 6 points of all the mitzvahs. Now we have to figure out how to put all the mitzvahs into this category, into one of these categories, or probably most of them somewhat play around with a lot of them. But to put them, that's the Rambam's basic understanding of mitzvahs. So now, let's get to mitzvos moadim. Okay, I'll talk them about this. Mitzvos moadim. So the Rambam Ferish, if you look in over here in the beginning of this page, page numbers like this, so you can't tell you which page. It says in Perek Lamed Achila Gimel, it says beferish, and then the Rambam divided the mitzvahs into groups. The 8th group is Yom Masirim Melucha, Klem Shabbos Yom Tovim, so Shabbos and all, and that's what's interestingly. This doesn't include Chanuka and Purim because Chanuka and Purim are Usiv Melucha, so therefore they're not really moadim. We have to think about this because it's drabanan, how the Rambam understands mitzvos drabanan. And he says all these things have a simple pshat, and he says they're all say beferish nepusik, as he's going to tell us. One is either asugis daya or manichas agif. What he means there is what he already mentioned in the Preidik before in Chaylik West Perek Lamed Aleph, that the Torah gives 2 reasons for Shabbos, and the Rambam understands those 2 reasons as being gif and neshama. In other words, everyone knows the 2 reasons are Ties Mitzrayim and Chedesh Olam, and Bris Olam. Chedesh Olam is the Rambam's language, but Bris Olam, Shashis Yom, and the Rambam says Shashis Yom Avada. That's the true belief that Shabbos should teach you. And we'll get in a minute how it teaches you. And second thing is Leman Yoniach. It was Leman Yoniach. You should have some rest. That's a very totally gifnistic thing. A Yid needs some rest. A person needs some rest. And Shabbos is made for that. And that is what he says. That's what the Torah means when it says that Zachar took ever the Yisu al ken sivcha. Because in Mitzrayim, what do we do in Mitzrayim? One thing we didn't do is rest. So when we got to Mitzrayim means you could have Shabbos. So Shabbos is actually Mitzrayim in the sense that Mitzrayim allows us to rest. That's the whole pshat of the Lichashnias according to the Ramba. And Shain. Of course, there's also chesed. There's also some kind of tikkun diet, midas and Yitzchok. That's clearly what he means here, because he's mentioning them clearly. Okay. So then if you look in Perek Mem Gimel, where he goes through beprutis all these old mitzvos, Shabbos, and all the other meadim, right? Each one of them, more or less, we could categorize each of the kiddos that he says here as belonging to one of these 2 things. Manichas agif, and by the way, he also says this is a difference in Shabbos and Yom Tov l'chayra. Shabbos is for rest, and Yom Tov has also a social aspect to it. The loike Shabbos l'chayra. Shabbos is b'chol mish v'sayachem. Yom Tov has atzeres. Yom Tov has getting together with people. And the Rambam quotes Aristotle literally more or less about this, where he says that Yom Tovim are for people to come together. In other words, yes gemeint, and we got the regels to treffen Gott. So the Rambam, maybe that's also a pshat. But the first pshat is to find your friends. To find your friends. Everyone knows that it's true, but the Rambam is moed alamas. And that's an important thing. Because if you never meet your friends, then society is just going to be. You need to have some little freien zusammen, trinken zusammen, essen zusammen. That creates friendship. It creates sociality, whatever, and that which leads to all other good things. So that's the pshat of Yom Tovim Boivim Kluli. Okay, now all of these things, I have to get to this. Now all of these things, if I'm up to here more clearly, all of these things have nothing to do with time, right? In other words, if we want to know if there's Kedisha, if the Rambam asked the Rambam, is there Kedisha in Yom Chamishu Usa, which, no. Basically, we'll say a person needs once, twice a year, 3 times a year, let's say, you need to get together with the oilam. Maybe in a bigger sense, right? On Shabbos, you get together with your family, you need to once, sometimes make a gressera. That's why the Chesidim and the Rebbe, this only sees of Yom Tovim is mamish pshitish l'mekra. Right? Because that's the point of Yom Tov. If you're alone, that's a very big gulas. That, of course, Megat and Shil, it's part of the thing. What was I saying? So, but this has nothing to do with time, right? We could say, the most we could say is that it has to happen a few times a year. So, some will find a good time for it to happen, right? But that's not important. Not an important question. Even if we'll talk about that, we can talk about the deeper things, right? We could take, teach us good midas. The Rambam says, Pesach teaches us. Even by the way, even the Rambam, even that kuras atov to God is really belongs to category of midas, not of category of moadim, right? It's tachkal teaching you to be a mensch. God doesn't need your kuras atov, right? So what's the point of saying gedenke da ibst groß from Mitzrayim? As a mensch, as wenn der Mensch groß from the egel, that's the only. That's what the bedrucha was for. Same thing. Sikas teaches us that we should remember that we're in the midbar. As a groß, good midas, as a vater. We could even go further. We could talk about. So we already have taken a gift, which has 2 things. Both, just to give you the exact idea of Yom Tov. Taking a gift is 2 things. Both a person needs simcha. The chinuch brings this part mostly from the Rambam. Right? A person's psychology is not can't be always tzvarachen and always freilich. It's a need. That's a personal need just for you. Just basically, literally, the Rambam would literally call this health issues. Depression is bad, the simcha is good. So for your health, you need some Yom Tovim. So Baruch Hashem, the Torah helped us and gave us Yom Tovim. And socially also. So and taking them with this, but that's nothing to do with simcha, that's stam. And health and socially also, we need zmaniyos simcha to get together and sich freien zusammen. So those are the tikkun gift. And then there's also the dayas nechonos, right? Let's Muslim Kippur teaches us that you could achieve it. That's a certain daya. The Rambam said, count that as an amena. Interestingly, we get a lot of shirim wanted about that. Lemushal Pesach teaches us Yitzias Mitzrayim, which in some sense maybe also teaches us Chiddush Olam, as Shabbos at least definitely teaches us Chiddush Olam, and so on. Those are the ayahs. And we could also add a third thing. This is something the Rambam doesn't say over here. I think the only place where the Rambam gets close to talking about this is in Hilchos Sikkos. We could talk with this is the Chassidus Shvat of Yom Tovim, and only says in the Rambam Hilchos Sikkos. We could talk about Yom Tovim as being a time for Dvaikus.
He says this?
In Hilchos Simchas Bas Shaiva it says Lechore that. Lechore the Rambam about the only plan the Rambam talks about Simcha and Simchas Yom Tov in various different ways in Sefer Ayan. One of them is he talks in two, and only interestingly he only talks about, he doesn't talk about the basic Simcha. Like that's the mitzvah of Simcha, that's push it. Das ist freien. The Rambam is marich noch Yom Tov by the about the Simcha being. No. Right? So that's basically what he said. That the whole reason we have Yom Tov is that the Urmalat should have that we should give tzedukah. Basically, tzedukah is the taamei mitzvah of Yom Tov. People think that it's tam prat. Simchas kreis is simchas mitzvah. Simchas kreis exists so that you should. That's what's also not a steer. It's not pshat. So if the simchas, why didn't we start making an appeal? Because that's what Yom Tov is for. And you call your friends, you make shlech munas. That's how it works. But if the Rambam is just trying to be more you, that don't confuse the silver to the tzua. The tachlis is from the ganze Yom Tov is that you should invite your friends. So don't forget to invite your friends, because then there's no point. Then it's simchas kreise. But that's simchas kreise is also a mitzvah the masa. But that's the first level. And the ikke of the Rambam is this, and that's what he also says in Hilchos Purim, right? It's all based on this logic. And then the other place, maybe in Hilchos Purim it talks about both. I'm not sure, but definitely in Hilchos Sikkah, the end of, which is the end of the, more or less the end of Side the Moadim and the Rambam. And the end of Hilchos Sikkah, he says this thing about mitzvah, the harbas b'simcha thing, and he moves on. Hilchot Azvov, and I quoted here also. In Hilchot Azvov, he moves from that simcha to avodah lishma. So simcha sheis mechudem asiyas mitzvah. Remember what he adds? If I have a sa'al shetzivu b'hem. So I'm taking you out of the world of mitzvahs, really. Don't really care about the mitzvah. I'm just really killing B'Havas Hashem. Is that and B'Havas Hashem to the Rambam is a code for what? Like everything else, a code for philosophy. It says beferish and mitzvahs ahava and many different times, right? What? The Rambam was meant to. It says like this in Hilchos Liliv in the end. It says Hasimcha sheismech udam. He talks about the mitzvahs Simchas Bas Shaiva the Minhagim. Then he says this very famous Rambam, right? Hasimcha sheismech udam asiyas mitzvah I ba'Havas ahal shetziva b'hem. In other words, scratch what I just said. Really, I mean this, right? That's what. Whenever he adds something that doesn't say, that's what it means, right? In other words, what's a havas ayil? Yediyas ayil. It says beferish noch shiva and noch sodat and noch mitzvos mitzvos Hashem, right? This is avodah dol. And what's a simcha? Because the Rambam explains many times. I have a whole sheet of that sikas. That havas hazukas Hashem goes together with simcha. In other words, simcha is just another word for human perfection, or human flourishing. Yudaimenia, anikra. If you read Aristotle, you'll see that the tachlis of everything is simcha, which really means simcha hazukas Hashem is the same thing. And therefore, that's kach shlavat Hashem kalach b'simcha and azmarich about this thing. And he's talking about being mizalzel in your gif. What does he want from this? What he wants is to try to explain you that here he's talking about simchas hazukas Hashem, which is the opposite of simcha gifness. In other words, taka mitzvah yom tov and simcha gifness. The Rambam translates that as busy hagif. We're juggling to be mevaz our gif.
They weren't sitting there and meditating.
This is the Rambam's shot. Ich kenne dich nicht helfen. This is the Rambam's shot. He brings the pusik. When he closes your mitzvos, you feel bad enough. You see, I can't manage something there, but that seems to be what Rambam is trying to get it to. So here he's talking about the highest level of simcha in the sense of actually being masi God and not only knowing, right? You have not only believing, you have to also know for this, right? Because you don't have simcha if you only believe, only if you know. So that's the only place where the Rambam talks about. Some people wanted to claim that in the Rambam when it talks about Adla Yuda means this also. I don't know exactly how that's possible, but shine. The Pashtas now, if you want to talk about Chanuka and Purim, the Pashtas the Rambam understands Chanuka and Purim as totally social Yom Tovim. because that's how you might understand mitzvos drabanan. I'm not sure. But the Rambam, both in the end of purim and in the end of chanuka, both of them brings this very similar halachas, which says that in chanuka he brings halacha at shuna bayis as koidem le kin, and purim he brings the same halacha that the mitzvah gresta mitzvah geben tunas levanim it's geben shleich monas. Same thing like he said in Chaziyamtiv, but he says it again. The end Hilchos Purim finishes like this, okay? Finishes with 2 halachas. These are 2 last halachas in Hilchos Purim, and always the Rambam finishes in a certain way. There's always a logic to his finishing. First is L'besa gave Matunis Levanim, then Simchas Yamtiv, because Simcha is Einsham Simcha Gedoy Le'elis Ma'ach Levanim. And the next halacha is what? That all the Sifra Navim Eksivim are going to be brutal, besides for Purim. So Lefi Dati, what does he want from this? L'manaf Kaminas, Gadzam brutal. What he wants is like this. Very important thing, because the Rambam is very clear. Okay, ending with this, I think. The Rambam is very clear, and we have to still get to how the Rambam understands time. There's something to talk about this. Time of Shabbos, yeah. Sure. But the Rambam is very clear that drabanan, he has a very sharp distinction between the drabanan and the rais, and he made it up himself. Nobody before this had this. If you read hamitzvos in the first 2 shirushim, you see him needing to argue for it. There's a saraya that it's not the pashtus. This is a very good example of torah because you ask any lam, any today, he tell you drabanan and the rais are totally different things. And if you ask most of the Shonim before the Rambam, never heard of this. Even after the Rambam, some of them didn't. Yes, they're not clear. Even the Rabun, the Gemara, you don't see such a. When we need something to be Michael, when we say that it's the Rabun, when we need to be Machum, we say that it even works the other way around. This sharp thing that the Raisa means what God told you, and the Rabun means what Rabun said, even that is not really true from both sides. And the Rambam is the first one to very, very sharply distinguish between the Rabun and the Raisas. And why does he want this?
The Rabban does even more.
The Rabban is Macholik. The Rabban.
More.
No, it's going back. The Rambam, okay, we can't just say alle Shirim auf einmal, okay? Can't see in a certain sense. I can go back. Right, that's I know what you're thinking about, but it's upside down. I'll explain you another time. Okay, the Rambam is very clear about this, and I think one of the reason why is similar to his reason for making ikrim. The Rambam really wants to know which mitzvahs are real and which mitzvahs are not real. And real to him means nitzich torah, and nitzich torah to him means the truth, right? Because if the Torah is in any sense accidental, then it's not forever. So in any sense in which the Torah is accidental, is not forever. And to the Rambam, that's basically what the Rabbanan means. In other words, the Tarek mitzvah, the Rambam calls chikim mashputim sadikim. Of course, that itself is only in a certain sense not accidental, because even all the other mitzvahs need a perish from the Rabbanan and so on, and the Rabbanan are authorized to change things. Lefi Torah chadar, whatever. So it's not entirely true, but at least the ikronis, the ideals of the Torah are forever. We could be ma'ayin about him for summers, but in the end of the day, the Rambam thinks that Torah is really only about truth. That's really what he means in his ikr, his 9th ikr of Nitzchis Torah. He doesn't really mean the Torah as it is. It means the Torah as it is true, right? In other words, let's at least say only the Rais, it's not the Rabunans. That's one level of this difference. The Rabunans are fetish. The Rambam says befetish. The Rambam namish moadim. Rambam makes up a new halacha that if you say that something is in the Rais and you're over on Lesikra, and if you would say that if you be mechaven in the Rambam, if you're mechaven in Ashkenazi mitzvos of Lading and Chanuka, like the same kavuna they have pesach, you're over on the lav the Rais of Lesikra. Yeah, if you're mechaven that the Chum didn't mean this, they meant to say, in order to remind us Inyan Kluli or Lizman in a certain sense. Maybe in Chum can't only make mitzvos Lizman. Maybe all the Rabunans are going to be brutal at some point. Yeah, that's beferish in Hilchos Megillah. And therefore, now another thing, Chlaf Tilag. Nicht nur the Rambam is so sharp about the Reis der Rabbanan. In the same way, all these things are each line we could make a whole drush. I'm just trying to put things together. In the same way, the Rambam has an extremely sharp distinction between Torah's Moshe and Nevi'im, which again most other Rishonim never heard of. It says in the Gemara a few times, but even the Gemara says it itself. The Kizri says beferish the opposite than this, and Bichlal. It doesn't really make sense. If you think about it, why shouldn't a Navi? Torah, in other words, the Rambam says the only Moshe is authorized to make halachas. Nobody else. In other words, this is crazy. A Navi comes and tells you, God told me that this is what you should do. And the Rambam says, you're Navi Sheikh. How is this even possible? The Rambam struggles with this and so the Torah. How does this even make sense? Even God can't change the Torah? What's going on? What does that even mean? The old Torah is Nevi'ah Moshe. So the Rambam is, of course, is based on Nevi'ah Moshe being different. And at the end of the day, what it's based on in the end is that Torah Moshe is just another way of saying the truth. The correct way of acting. And there can't be 2 correct ways of acting, right? So even God, in a certain sense, can't change that. The Rambam is not a divine command theorist, right? And even God can't change things. So as much as Torah Moshe is the truth, the real truth, it's not possible to change that. Ein Nevi'im, so the Nevi'im are either tzorich shu, or to give mitzvah, that we should keep the Torah and so on. But Nevi'im, and also because I'm not even talking about the chilas Nevi'is Moshe, but I'm talking Nevi'im can't change the Torah. Therefore, call Aksivim, call Nevi'im Asin Libutlim, Moshe Mashiach. He says Chitz Megillas Esther. But what does it mean in Chitz Megillas Esther? Because Megillas Esther is Halucha Shal Torah Shebal Peh. You quote both together. Megillas Esther ve Halucha. In other words, Megillas Esther is interesting because there's a Halucha in it. Not a real Halucha. Halucha that Lamas we have to fiyazech. You have to read the Megillah to know the Halucha. But there's no content in the whole Nevi'im Aksivim that doesn't say really in the Torah. It's useless. Okay? That's the end of Hilchas Megillah. In other words, the Rambam seems to understand, and he says the Ma'ipin Libatli Olam. And he seems to explain it in a physical way, because all the tzuras will forget, and this tzura not. But that's why you finish. Kol zichni ma tzuras. This is l'chor the pshat. Kol zichni tzuras ibat l'mois Mashiach. Shnei meknish kichat tzuras l'shaynes. But tzuras pirim lezichni l'zach. In other words, we're always going to feel a need to.
But in here, also things that are in the Torah.
What do you mean? Which things?
What's the solution?
Hameshachim shetoyre v'kaluch shtoyre peh. Torah shebal peh.
What's the call ha?
Nevi'im v'kol aksivim asin libutel. Not chemesh. Torah, we're going to be no, it doesn't have that girsa. No, that's a different girsa. That's a whole different girsa. The Rambam understands that to mean what he said in the second part. In the sense of we're not going to care about Yitzias Mitzrayim anymore, but might still be a mitzvah matzah. His time of kol hatzoros. Right, but that's l'chayre. I know, but the chayre that's his explanation. He means, according to him, that means he doesn't bring the kol ma'adim b'tan Rambam. The chayre means the Yom Tovim in the sense of Megillas Tanis, things like that. You can ask about pesach is also for a tzura, so why not? Get a shal. But l'chayre that's how the Rambam understands that be'adam not me'anderai, so me'adam drabanan keli. So chanuka is going to be butel and not purim. Keli as that's zach. But also l'chayre, I don't know why he thinks that purim won't be butel. Gets this from my choshen is not coming. That's the thing. Now, same thing. Halachas Purim also ends with how it's amazing. So people think that Rambam brings this because to show us how important Purim is. L'chayre shows us the opposite, how not important Purim is, or how not important Kol HaTorah is. All mitzvos drabanan and all Nevi'im Aksivim, and not clear why Purim is special over here. Not Abyssal. Maybe he's trying to say how important Purim is. Rambam usually, in the end of Shabbos, like Shabbos, whatever. This is the opposite. Ketana Purim, right? Purim is really about Matunas Lev Yoinim. If you put together two halachas, the Rambam is really saying you can always have a mitzvah of Matunas Lev Yoinim. Because what's Purim about? Purim is not about. There's another thing that he says Purim is about, and about B'chol Karani Alav, so Veshlein, Kapunim. And Hilchas Chanukah for sure. And then Hilchas Chanukah ends with how not important Chanukah is. It doesn't realize. It says Mitzvah Chanukah Chaviva, and then it goes on to explain what he means. Shabbos
is more right.
Not Shabbos. Don't say a word in that Shabbos. Nein. That's the Rambam. Line says, so muss ich Shabbos. Let me show you another thing that's falsch about that you're just assuming that it doesn't say that. Kick in the Rambam. Ich habe gebringt in the end, one of the last pages. It should be here. If it's not here, it's in the other one. There's missing a page. No, should not have a copy. No. Neem de Rambam, the last... Ja, bis me treffen ja in Rambam. Mach papers, so lang geringe zu treffen, but es helft nicht. Here, Hilchas Chanukah, okay? Yeah, that's the end. So wuchst du steht about wegen Shabbos. Tell me if it says something about Shabbos. Don't say anything about Shabbos. It doesn't say anything about Shabbos. Was kommt an Shabbos? What Shabbos got to do with Shulam? Don't say anything about Shabbos. In the weekdays also. And the weekdays also not by says Koidim Lechanukah. Because good la Shulam. What's it got to do with Shabbos? It could be that in the weekdays you don't need a lech by nacht because you can go to sleep. It could be the technical reason why it's only the guy's Shabbos. But even the Gemara doesn't need to say Shabbos, by the way. The Gemara says not by. No, the Rambam holds like this.
I think so.
I didn't make this up. Look in the Sefer HaMaftach. You see people saying this. An andere word, the Rambam finishes Chanukah. He starts, if two halachas before, he says, it's Chanukah Chaviva el Moed, Tzurch li Zubak, Dalet Yanes, Lois B'Shvacha Eil, Nishafel Ein El Mayochel, Natzduka. And then he finishes off saying that it's not really like that. Shulam Bais is more important. It's very funny. Everyone didn't get to the end. two halachas before he says it's more important. You have to take a, and also why? Not the asma because ledia shvacha al. Of course, shvacha al is important, but lemasa even for that it's not really true because in that Abyssal is koydem l'shvacha al. So in a certain sense, this is very radical. In a certain sense, we always have this hierarchy of tikkun agif and tikkun nefesh. Sometimes tikkun agif is goyven and tikkun nefesh. I have to understand why. It's a very serious, deep question. Right? How could it be? The Rambam l'choyre should be the first one to say, "Soll the vab starben, dies dweikes." That's not actually what he says. He says, "Hashem nimcha glasses shulim." I have a teretz, but I don't like that teretz ever. Teretz is what it says in the end of Moadim that kivayla chafatzti. Very, very weird ending. The Rambam, after 3 prokim about how dweikes is everything, he says that's start the puskan yerim, yeah. Ali salam is hachocham chachmus v'la gibuk v'rusa ele haskel v'daya isi. And then the Rambam says, wait, read it till the end of the pusik. Ki ani Hashem ois chesed mishpat tzedakah b'oretz kip ele chafatzti nem Hashem. So what does the idea Hashem mean? La chesed mishpat tzedakah b'oretz. So and the Rambam seems to mean over there that it's not possible to know God, only Maaseh Hashem. And what does knowing Maaseh Hashem mean? And how do you do Maaseh Hashem? In other words, in a certain sense, it turns the whole thing upside down again. That the whole idea of Hashem leads you to do Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. That's what it says in the end. Some people that mamash understand that I'm like this. I never think it's true, but I do think that there's some cycle that's jumping up and down over here. Like one over here very clearly shows. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, but you see, the Rambam knew about it. The Rambam brings this. But it could be that you have to read it otherwise. It could be the Rambam means it's a stira, and the Rambam also a stira in the Rambam sources. There was machlokes philosophy wegen der Schale. Should I push it? Like one over here, he says beferish that Shem nich las shulam vik, and then he finishes not only about chanuka but kol akila. Good la shulam shekol torah nit las shulam ba'olam. Shnem derchei da kanam kol nisvaseh shulam. In other words, why is the Torah? This is taamei mitzvos, taamei klala mitzvos, taamei of the first time at least. And why doesn't he say a second time? He seems to not think that Chanukah has to do the second time. And it's very important. I think it's important. Why? Why do I think this is true? I'll tell you why. In my mind, this is based on a lot of my own cycle, nicht on Abyssal. But if you think, and it's very important, because I think that people are very confused about this. If the whole Torah is for, in other words, the echte reason why you're born, right? The real shleim is the real tachlis of existing, which is of course the tachlis of the Torah and everything else. If the real tachlis is to have no God, right? That doesn't mean that doesn't actually give more power to the mitzvahs, it gives less power to the mitzvahs. The loike Chassidus, right? Chassidus keeps on making this mistake, as far as I can tell. And I know why, because they're very worried that you can be reformed or something. But they keep on making this mistake where mitzvahs are only what a mitzvahs about atmas semis, never about anything else, right? But atmas semis is not about mitzvahs. It doesn't go back. It's not possible. It's impossible to bridge this gap. And therefore, if you understand that the Torah is to know God, do you need to light chanuka to know God? Shigam can ganz get wissen God directly by way of cycle. That's the only way of knowing God. I mean, that's the Chassidus shit. That's not the Chassidus shit. Nicht Chassidus Chabad, and Hashem doesn't hold like this. Nicht maske. No, nicht maske. No, nicht stems. Tanya says Beferish talks about understanding God. It doesn't say ever that you don't understand God only by doing mitzvahs. No. Klar, sicher nicht. Was macht das Bannes und die alle Sachen? No, nicht maske. Nicht maske. I don't think that's what he means to say. Kapunim. No, you can't, then it doesn't work. But then that doesn't work. That's again, actually. If the reason why mitzvahs are important is because it's the only way to know God, right? Then the mitzvahs are not important. They can't both be important and not important at the same time. What is it supposed to mean? If it means nothing, if it's only words, then we might as well say that even Chazal does that, and it will work the same way. Is there any way to know that this works or it doesn't work? Does it have any meaning? I don't care if there's no to it. Does it have any meaning, this? What? Does it have any meaning? The killer is shit, you see? So again, you can't, okay, let me finish what I'm saying. Okay? So what is Lamasa, it doesn't mean make mitzvahs more important. Vaket, it makes the Idis Hashem more important than mitzvahs. And therefore, Hayotzaluni Mizeh is that you should always be mad of Shulam Bayis on doing a mitzvah. You understand why? Because you want to know God. If you think that mitzvahs are something in themselves, they don't. In other words, mitzvahs have no tam. That's how the Rambam would call it. Then you should. Serious shala should you shalom bayis or mitzvah, right? But if mitzvahs have a tam and their tam is 2 tamim, let's say each mitzvah has both tamim. Let's say I don't know if it's true that each mitzvah has both tamim, but let's say they each have both tamim. Sai Chanukis Ledianes, which is of course Shvachal, is definitely part of Yidis Hashem, and Sai Shulam Bayis, right? Then we know which one we could be mevater on in the Masa HaMitzvah, right? Because the Yidis Hashem is not really truly a Masa HaMitzvah. Verkehrt. Es machen Shulam Bayis doch it ist wegen Lachte Bedruch auf bringt Choch zu Gott. So God doesn't ever get lost by not having Chanukah Lecht. Your wife might get lost by not having Shabbat, by not having Lecht. Because but over there it doesn't help. Because the mitzvos, in other words, the mitzvos are more real mitzvos than the Lamukah. The mitzvos are not semunim for something else, right? Some of them might be, right? You could say maybe the Shlech Munis is just a simon of giving geld, but the real ones, at least in the sense that the ner bais is not even a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah, it's a fact. Either is lechtig or it's a tinkel. So you can say, weißt echt is lechtig, I really love you, kill is lechtig. Okay, Lamas is a tinkel, yeah? So it's a tinkel, it's a tinkel. So that you can't be mevater. But on the doing a mitzvah, was is nodig to the man of God, so nicht das nicht, das verkehrt. That's what I think about this. Okay. I definitely don't think that Tanya or anyone see this really thinks that you can't know God without mitzvahs. They better say the opposite many times. They keep on getting stuck in this because they want mitzvahs to be important. But I don't think they actually leave that vurai. And the reason I think that is because they're Oisik and Tvaikas. They're not only Oisik and mitzvahs, they're not litvaks. They're not nefesh chayim. The tanya get very close sometimes, but they don't say that you shouldn't be oisik and understanding God by himself, which whatever the way is. By Visions is by singing zmiyos, and Chabad is by the Siddhish and some other places by doing something else. But they to them knowing God is a thing in itself. It's not another. It doesn't reduce to doing mitzvahs. The loike nefesh chayim. In Tanya, for sure, knowing God is a thing. There's such a thing as knowing God. However, it's a feeling, a knowledge. Ich weiß nicht was. Es ist du as a Zach. In Lamas, in Avodah Hashem, there's such a thing knowing God. They don't really believe that. Let's be real. I'm asking you. In Tanya, in Chabad, the minig halucha Lamas to most of the day just do things that are for sure mitzvahs that I say, like the Litvak would tell you, or they spend half of the day learning chassidus. Which one they do? It's not really true. They're just worried very much that you're going to stop doing mitzvahs. They keep on saying things like that. They don't really believe that. And secondly, it's to Agre's famous cloud that the more someone tries about something, the less he really thinks like that, right? Tanya keeps on saying this, and not, what's more than that, the Kizri, of course, which says this theory, also doesn't think that it's impossible to test. The Kizri literally says, let's test it out. Let's see if an hour Shabbos there's more Rosh Hashanah than on Sunday in church. He thinks that it's obvious that we have more Rosh Hashanah, so that's why the Torah is shown at the church. But if it would be different, then it would be a kasha to him. He doesn't say that's the definition. You could play around by saying that's the definition and then it's going to be
this thing, I had this shtick.
Okay, well that's schon stam.
It's more get mass. I never read the story. The Pil Parashat Tibbas Ebe gesagt, aber Rambam, you were yesterday there. You were there.